Thanks, Robert. From 15 tonnes a hectare to 1 tonne per 15 hectares last year. Look, I've been asked today to talk about obviously lifting farm turnover, what we've essentially done, and over probably the last 12 to 15 years in our family operation. So, although this is a GRDC update, I'll cover our cattle operation because obviously we are a mixed farming operation, and the cattle part of it is, particularly in these dry years, is more significant than what our grains operation is. I mean, it's complements, they both work hand in hand together. So obviously, as Robbie said, we farm on both sides of Roma. We've expanded over the last 10 years quite exponentially. Hopefully we continue to stay afloat. Up until May 2012, our rainfall was about 560 mils a year. Since May 2012, we've had 200 mils up until last week. And in that, we managed to grow, obviously we had a full profile when we started, but we managed to grow an average wheat yield in 2012 of nearly 4 tonnes a hectare and 150 kilos a hectare last year, but we did get something. We try and, we do have a rotation, which to minimise costs, we need legumes in our rotation, and because we're trying to farm wheat in a subtropical environment, sorghum is also quite a significant part of our operation if it ever did rain in summer. From our cattle operation, it's fluctuated over the last number of years, but we're back to about 500 near pure Angus cows, and we then trade between 1,000 and 1,700 steers, just depending on the environment and what we can make money out of. Our whole focus for probably the last 10 years has been improving our efficiencies economically and increasing productivity, so, as long as we're still making a go of it, and probably thinking outside the square and being willing to change. I mean, I see a lot of issues, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody else, of something changes and you still want to go and refer to the status quo rather than sitting down and re-evaluating where we're at. One of the things that we looked at about nearly 15 years ago now is obviously with the declining productivity, was how we could use what we already had without having to go and spend too much more money and without having to go and diversify too much. So as a part of that, we started planting both date palms and bottle trees as an irrigation. So we were able to use all our own machinery, and other than the trees and the irrigation setup itself, it was something that grew, and from there it's grown into quite a big business in itself, where we sell mature trees before the GFC into southern Australia, but now probably everywhere from Townsville all the way through to Sydney mainly, and every other stop in between. And it's turned into we've got a wholesale nursery that runs with that of smaller bottle trees, smaller palms, and a lot of other specialist trees where it's allowed us to be able to get a different income stream where we can control what's going on in our own environment. I'm going to jump around a little bit. One of the, a lot of our, obviously the grain that we produce, we've tried to go and minimise every cost that we've got. Most of it goes into our own intensive feeding area. We do have a feedlot accreditation, we do have a feedlot approval, it's not yet built. We're finding the economics of actually building that feedlot more prohibitive than what we think we're going to actually do with it. So we're grain feeding cattle without actually getting the grain fed money. Obviously from where our logistics of it, and I'll come to it in a minute, we try and move our grain as close to home as possible, and hopefully somebody else pays the freight on it. I know that's as long as, we try and mainly sell it on farm, and as a last resort we'll put it into grain, the archaic thing they call Grain Corp. Lifting turnover. I'm going to move off grain a little bit. Some of the things, we sit down probably 3 times a year, and that includes everybody, including the blokes that work for us, and say, this is the season to date, and it's normally at the end of summer crop harvest and the normal end of winter crop harvest, and a go at planting time as well. What have we done? How do we change it? And what hasn't worked for us? And then we've sat down and analysed every section of our business. And one of the things we changed was we've bred for 100 years. But we had to change something. So instead of focusing on bulls, and we do buy very good bulls, but we went through and made sure every cow had a calf every year. And if she doesn't have a calf, there's not much point in keeping her. And then the quality of that calf was also important to us. So that's when we moved to this Angus job. It's been a bit of a furphy for us because you can produce pure Angus calves, but if you sell them into the feedlot system, you've got some kid trying to make a name for himself. And if his ears aren't looking right or his dewlap's just not quite right, he falls out of that Angus job and you lose 30 cents a kilo. So no matter how hard you try, you still get screwed somewhere along the line. What we have done though is over time, set ourselves up, and when we can make a lot more money in droughts than what we ever can in a good year. This year has been a prime example of it. We've had enough feed this year to be able to see everything that of our own breeding herd, and to be able to buy a fair few steers. We had enough silage and we kept all last year's grain, and we only keep last year's grain, and I'll come to it, as long as it's economically viable. I price all our grain as an on-farm price of what we could get for it from anybody else, and if I can make money out of the cattle operation on top of that, or the same amount of money but, without having to pay freight, we'll go and do that. And that moves every day, and we'll come to it in a minute. If that price changes throughout the season, we'll get to a point where we say, okay, that's the end of the cattle operation for the time being. We'll go and move that grain because we can make more money out of it moving it than what it is by putting it through our own animals. And that's hard to do often, because you'll be sitting in a scenario where every week we'll be going to the sale and we'll be buying more cattle and more cattle and more cattle, and all of a sudden wheat hits $350 on farm, and you think, oh, where am I going to go? Because we've done this to a point, but all of a sudden it becomes uneconomical. So as soon as we can get out of those cattle, we'll then move and sell what grain we've got left. Over the last probably 15 years, we've never been forced to sell a droughted beast. Through all of this, and at the moment, while everybody else is, our average buy price this year is $1.50, and sorry, I'll go on this side. Our average buy price this year has been $1.50. I'd hate to be selling, which is under the cost of production of an animal. It's costing us about $420 to $440 to drop a calf on the ground. We're buying 300 kilo animals for under $400. The economics of that is we have a spreadsheet that we punch the numbers into at least once a week to make sure, and this obviously determines where we're going for the year, but as things change, how our mix of our operation changes. So, at the moment, the cattle we're buying going onto grazing oats, it's not too hard to see where the profit is this year, and without a full profile of moisture, we're still going to be able to plant oats and not have to worry about whether it's going to get through to a grain fill situation or not. These numbers move, and you'll see as we go forward that I put in the numbers in. I know that $280 for wheat, it was a couple of weeks ago, it was a month ago. These are all on-farm numbers, and we'll just punch them in as we go on what we believe the number is we can get on the day. You're going to say that you can get to more than $220 for wheat, but that one doesn't equate to the previous slide of that grain sorghum number. If it ever rained in spring or in January, we'd graze at grain sorghum. And so that's obviously when we go and punch those numbers into those numbers that we've come back through from that first spreadsheet, just all links back through. And we then know that if we had to feed those steers that we've been buying without the potential of an oats crop, we're going to break even on the exercise. If we get an oats crop, and we've now had enough rain last week to be able to plant an oats crop, then the gross numbers, we may stand to make a lot of money out of those steers by July or August. When costs and cost cutting, it's not too hard to read that. Cost cutting's got a lot of hairs on it from our point of view. We've always had the attitude that a relationship with somebody has been more important than cutting 10 cents out of a deal of Roundup. And it feels really good when you've screwed somebody for 10 cents, but before Bayer lost, before Balances has got generics, we were the only ones in that district last year that got Balance for the pure reason that we'd been good to the same seed company for years. And if you double Roundup prices, I did this yesterday, if you go from $4.50 to $9 on Roundup, it affects your gross margin by $17. One of the things we came out of planting was that we had 2 planters together last year, and even in a poor year, we've always known that there were 2 tines on one planter that weren't quite right. The difference was phenomenal between the 2 planters in yield last year. We're only talking 300 to 500 kilos a hectare from last year. We can fix those 2 tines, we'll increase our yield on that second planter by 10%, and there's $60 a hectare every year from this point forward. So from our point of view, and it's very hard to tell people that saving 10 cents a litre, and they'll ring up and say, how much is Roundup? Digger, whatever it is, as long as you're buying it from somebody that's going to look after you going forward. One of the things that we have looked at is obviously freight for us is quite a significant amount. It costs us about $45 to $50 a head to get a beast to market, $50 a tonne for wheat. So to Brisbane, and obviously everything's priced on Brisbane. So if we can save that price, I mean, if we can, it's not too hard. If we can go from 25% of the value of commodity to 5% of the value of a commodity by using that grain, we pick up that. We essentially can gain that out of our operation as well. We've focused a lot on storage, grain drying, grain handling over the last 10 years. We've spent a lot of money on it, and we seriously do pick up at least $30 a tonne every year on being able to segregate our own grain on farm. 2008, 2010 when it started raining, we'd finished harvest by the time it started raining. We harvested everything wet. By the time it started raining, we just set to and started drying. The dryer used to run 24 hours a day, and we never had a downgraded grain in 2010. I think it was 2010 that was the wet year. So that's cost us a lot of money to do, but we made a lot of money out of that exercise. So I know that my probably presentation is a lot different to everybody else's, but our focus has been on getting everything right, making sure that every seed comes up. We moved from air seeders to plant grain sorghum in twin rows where we thought we were getting an even plant stand, to building a disc planter that we were able to drop the discs out of and put tines into. Our yield increased firstly from going from an air seeder to the precision boxes. I mean, I know everybody on the Downs has worked it out, but from a broad scale point of view, nobody else has done it. And we've lifted about 20% of our yield just by making sure that every seed was right beside it. And then when we went to the disc, we picked up another 10 or 15%. That was all beside each other. We went to liquids after that, picked up another 5% in our yield. And these were all trials that were beside each other in one sorghum year. It was a good sorghum year, but that was how much we've been able to gain every year on some of these things. For all the money that I've told you we've made, I don't know where it's going, but it's still there somewhere. I think we're still afloat. So the wobbly boot. If I didn't have to pull you out of there this morning, we would have been right. So, yeah, look, we've essentially focused on, and I mean, my personality doesn't allow us to focus on the small things, so I have to sit down and listen to these guys and say, right, we need to fix that, because otherwise we'll just go and tear into it. So, it's probably been, that's the biggest part of what we do, is making sure that every last seed is right, or every last animal is right. I always figure, Robbie, if I can walk away from one of these things and I've made more money than what it's cost me to come here, or I can pick up one thing and go home and have enough nous to go and implement that. I mean, we went from air seeders for grain sorghum in twin rows, where we thought we were actually doing not a bad job, to disc planters from Summer Grains Conference. And we paid for the disc planter in 1 year. So, yeah, these sort of things, talking to wizened, good farmers like yourself. No, but essentially these sort of things. I mean, I've been lucky enough to obviously consult before we ever came home, and so I've got a great network where we discuss it. I mean, I've got a few mates that we sit down probably once every 3 months and discuss what we're doing. No holes barred. Nobody laughs at each other when they've said their failures. And I mean, the failures have probably been more important than what the successes are. I mean, you learn more from failure than what you ever do from success. So we've got 2 other mates, and we seriously do. We just sit down, and I mean, they're great discussions. We run all our cows. Every acre of stubble gets used. If the hoof tracks get too bad, we'll go and buy manure, spread manure, which I don't know whether the economics work on the pure spreading the manure, but the goodness we get out of it is hugely beneficial, and then plough it back in. So we're firstly not afraid to go and plough. But I mean, I've run all my cows and all my stubble this year, and I can't see how it's even affected it. And I mean, the research out of Warrialda says that hoof tracks have a very little impact on anything at all. And in fact, it probably helps, because if that hoof track will hold the water and not let it spin off, let it flow off. So, yeah, no, we use every acre.